In February 2018, I started an early 14th century helm, and now finally I'm going to finish it with you. Also, since it was common to have a three-dimensional crest affixed to the top at tournaments and the like, not the battlefield by this point in time, we're going to make a sturdy base that ties to the crown of the helmet. You ready? Let's do this. Freshly dusted off right out of storage are the pieces that I partially formed in part 1. The only additions since that video are the breaths in the mask. And if you haven't seen part 1, you can click on the link in the description for that, in case you want to see that first. When I made that video 2 years ago, I made a few serious mistakes that I have to tell you about. Before I get to that, I just gotta say that a part of me really wanted just to start over, but I decided that it wouldn't be right since there may have been one person out there who saw part 1 and was waiting for 2 years for part 2, and instead of telling that person to just scrap all of his scraps, so to speak, I'm gonna finish this 2018 helm, and then I'll do an updated 2020 helm with a slightly better pattern. It could have been better, but in my defense, I only had a couple of grainy photos to work with. Since that time, I've been in contact with a person who's added quite a bit to my knowledge of what this helm should look like. He's graciously provided me with a number of photos, which really assists with getting things right for the German Great Helm 2.0. So here are the mistakes that I made. Basically, you don't want to cut out the eye openings, and you don't want to cut the breaths in the mask until you're completely done with shaping the metal and you're satisfied with the extent to which you're going to be planishing, if at all. But if you do want to bring it to a high polish, you don't want any dents in there, you need to complete all of that before you cut out anything. So this would include the openings for the eyes, this would include the breaths, and really this would also include the holes for the rivets. You really need the pieces to all fit together before you cut out any of those pieces. And there's a real reason why. If the helmet's not fully formed, you still need to get those pieces to fit together. Obviously that means you're going to be hammering, and if you try to hammer anything that you've cut out, a sharp angle, like the inside of the eyes especially, the corner will be under tremendous stress, and that stress will cause cracks. It's almost impossible to avoid that. You can use heat to minimize that to some extent, but once you get that crack, the only thing that you can do is file it out. If there's room to do that, a lot of times there isn't. When you file the area, you're changing the shape, and so just to avoid that entirely, to not have to worry about filing things down, just don't cut those things out until all the pieces fit together. So I did break my own rules, but they weren't technically my rules until just now, not in 2018. Having said all that, when you are ready, you can drill the holes for the breaths and use metal files to remove the metal. It's easier than it looks. It took about 15 minutes per hole, and that does add up. You can be as precise as you'd like to be. Historically, though, they don't seem to be too perfectly measured or spaced, at least to me. Next time, I definitely won't be drawing these shapes on with a Dremel. Permanent markers like Sharpies are going to work better because they don't leave behind unnecessary marks. Okay, so here we are, part 2. We've got our vice grips, we've got our fire extinguisher because we're going to be working hot this time. We want to be very careful. We're going to work with MAP Pro Gas, which is a torch, really easy to use, and it'll save us a lot of trouble. Really what we want to use it on is this top piece. This is the crown of the helm, and we want to put a slight shape in there, slight concave shape, and so using the torch really softens it up a little bit. And then that's not the only reason. Really, it's because there's a point at the tip of, or at the front of this crown, and that makes it a little bit more of a complex shape. You have these 3 different planes essentially meeting in one place, and I found that if you hit the metal repeatedly over and over, you're gonna have cracking if you're working it cold. That's just what I found. Maybe somebody can do it, not me. I need to use heat. So that's why we're using the MAP Pro Gas, and we always want to be cautious, so we've got that fire extinguisher on hand. What I found with this crown is that it really was more complex than it should have been. It just went over the front so many times with the heat, reworking it, trying to get it to fit, because every piece obviously has to fit, and this one has to come down over the front without leaving too much of a gap. We really don't want any gap to be there at all. Once you begin drilling holes for rivets, I find that it's necessary to be constantly screwing and unscrewing the piece. You make a few changes, bring the pieces together, tighten the screws, and then undo the screws to make more changes, and on and on. It can get pretty annoying, but patience does pay off. The incremental changes, even though they're difficult to see, eventually do make everything start to fit together. There really is an order to putting this whole thing together. We want to start with the top of the helm, and then affixed to the top of the helm, we're going to make sure that the brow fits. And then once we've got the brow fitting, we put in the top back piece. And if all three of those pieces fit well, then we can start to screw the holes. Essentially, we're going to be drilling the holes out and fitting a little machine screw there and a nut to keep everything in place. But we're not going to rivet anything yet. We want to make sure that everything fits before we do any riveting. This is a part where it started to feel like, it's ugly. It's dented up. The finish is not going to be that great. It is not going to look like a piece that I'd want to show anybody. But at the same time, I feel like this is the first of hopefully some, if not many, helms, and so they should get better from here. It's like a starting point. I'm also going to make my own washers. And to do this, I'm going to use the same 16 gauge steel. Basically just cut them into square shapes, drill holes into them, and then we're going to cut them all out. We could use 18 or 22 gauge, thinner metal, but I'm going to stick with a 16 gauge. Washers are really important. You could, I guess, just rivet the whole thing together with no washers, but there's a decent chance that over time, with a lot of use, the rivet could work itself loose. When you're hammering the rivet in place, the end that you're hammering begins to mushroom and spread out. If you have a washer in place, it grabs onto that and you could immediately feel how secure it is. You wouldn't necessarily have to cut them yourself. You could use machine, washers, just regular washers. The back, unfortunately, I had to cut a second piece for it because when I got the top fixed, it no longer fit. I guess the one good thing is the lower back piece is the simplest. It has the least complex shape, so it didn't take too long to put together. And then we want to rivet everything here. Now, these button rivets really don't look like historically accurate rivets. If you look at the pictures, historically accurate rivets are not very pretty. They're not all uniform. The head of the button with button rivets is enormous and it's round. It's like a big mound, whereas historically, at least at this time period, they were sort of flattened. It looked a little bit more like nails. At this point, you have the option to bring the helm to the level of finish that you're aiming for. As I mentioned before, due to the hammer marks that remain, the dents, etc., it really wouldn't make any sense to bring the surface to a high polish. Instead, I'm just going to clean up the Sharpie marks and just maybe try to give it a more uniform surface with the sanding pads. We're close to being done, but the inside may need to be sanded as well. There are going to be rough, almost dangerous edges and some corners in there that are really sharp. I definitely wouldn't want to put it on without a coif or a liner, even after most of the metal burrs and sharp edges are rounded. Lastly, we need to drill holes for a base, which will at some future date support a heraldic crest. This is the part I've been looking forward to for a while. A paper template ensures that the holes are similarly spaced. Since these holes remained exposed most of the time, because that crest is not going to be sitting there all the time, I'm going to smooth them out with a Dremel again. Once all of the holes are drilled, it is finally time. Finally time to get working on our crest. A stunning three-dimensional piece atop the helm. We start out with a base, but that will have to wait till next time. Don't go anywhere. I have to try this on. We got a big padded deal right here, and should protect my head. This is not the big padded deal that I'm going to be showing you how to make. It's a different big padded deal. You ready? Here we go. Let's see if this fits. Oh. Okay. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yes. Yes, reasonably well. I can see you. Can you see me? Can you see my eyes? There you go. Done. Thanks for watching today, guys. I really appreciate it. Thanks to Patreon supporters. William, if anybody wants to join me on Patreon, love to have you come along and help out the channel. What I'm going to show you now, if you've made it this far, is just the patterns. I was thinking about the easiest way to do this, and I'm sure there is a program out there, maybe through Photoshop or something like that, where I could have an exact copy. But then how would you print it out? I just don't know how that would work exactly. So it seems like one of the easier ways is to simply show you what it would look like on a grid. So if I hold the pattern over the grid and you have your own grid, either you make a grid with 1-inch squares or you've got something like this. I have no idea what it's called. If you sewed a lot of clothing, you probably have one of these boards that have this grid on them. It tells you, it can show you exactly where you would cut. And for you guys that stayed till the very end, wow, that's dedication. Talk to you all later. Bye-bye.